I think growing up, I have felt lonely, alone at many times, many points, right? My parents didn't really know how to support me socially. They thought it's all about going to school and taking classes and doing homework and doing extra homework and taking extra classes. So growing up, I didn't have as many friends as I hoped. I remember in middle school, my dad always be like, "Well, you're going to America in a couple of years. So what's the point of making friends here in China? Because they're not going to matter in a couple of years. So why don't you just stay at home and do work?" Which I never really understood, right? He really believed in it, and he always tells me even now that he was right. This is why I like made it in America. Your English is better and you survived and you got through school in America. It's because you didn't make friends in China. You didn't waste your time doing that, which make no sense, right? Like sometimes I look back and I regret not having made some of those connections that could have still be here today.
Mr. Dom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sharia. Happy to be here.
The world is going through a mental health crisis, as you've described it. And I've seen that play out in my own life a lot. I'd say in the last year, it's been one of the biggest themes of my life. Um, Trying to understand like why it's such a problem and what ways what things I can do in my life to fix that. And I've definitely noticed it a lot recently in other people, right? Whether it be my friends, my family, or people I walk by, it's loneliness is at all-time high, and our levels of well-being have just plummeted.
Yeah.
So let's start the topic of mental health. So talk to me about the experiences you've had with mental health in your own life and why you observe it to be one of the biggest problems in the world today.
Yeah, so as an educator, at least as someone who was trained in education, I went to school to learn about teaching and theory of how to raise children and adolescents. And mental health is always one of those topics where we want to spend more time on, but don't, right? Because it's on a very long list of things. It's not a priority for teachers, even though it should be. I think especially coming out of COVID in the last couple of years, and now in this kind of post-COVID era where there's a generation of students, just people in general, adolescents who grew up isolated in their own homes, who are now learning to socialize, learning to talk to each other. And then thinking about adults who have gone through a lot of this pandemic stuff where, they were alone at home, isolated with one or two friends to ever talk to once every week or so. So it's really hard for us to really rebuild those connections. I think it takes time, and I don't know how long it's going to take, right? For me, I spent my entire junior and senior year of college in my dorm room alone, um, because it was COVID, right? So half the school was off campus or back home, and my parents are out of the country. So I was in my dorm room alone for basically the entire 2 years. I was allowed 10 minutes a day to walk to dining hall, take food, and walk back to my room. And then I ate at my desk, and then I did work, and then I went to bed, like 2 feet behind me. There was my bed. I wake up and do the same thing again. Didn't really have a chance to exercise, didn't really have a chance to talk to people outside of Zoom. So that was really hard, right? And then suddenly in 2021, I went to grad school at Penn, and then it's like, oh, by the way, now you're back in person. Remember how to like socialize, remember how to answer questions. Remember you had to raise your hand to like answer a question instead of everybody waiting to unmute, right? It's a whole paradigm shift. So it's hard to get back to that. Like even today, sometimes when I teach, when I have meetings with other adults in a department, like no one really knows when to talk because we're all like waiting for the Zoom light to go off. Um, yeah, like I said, I think it's going to take a long time for us to get back to it. I already forgot what your question is. So,
Well, yeah, let's go off that. I think COVID has been a big scar in everyone's life in many different ways, and it's definitely very unnatural to be living in like a 6 by 6 foot room and spending all your time there, not being around other people. It's not natural to do so, and obviously that can contribute to a huge problem in the world today with the loneliness. But would you say that's where it started? Would you say that from COVID is when the loneliness all started, or do you think this was a growing problem even before that?
absolutely, right? I think COVID magnified this issue, for sure. But I think loneliness or any sort of mental health issues definitely started way before 2020, 2019, right? I think growing up, I was I have felt lonely, alone at many times, many points, right? My parents didn't really know how to support me socially. They thought it's all about going to school and taking classes and doing homework and doing extra homework and taking extra classes. So growing up, I didn't have as many friends as I hoped. I remember in middle school, my dad always be like, "Well, you're going to America in a couple of years. So what's the point of making friends here in China? Because they're not going to matter in a couple of years. So why don't you just stay at home and do work?" Which I never really understood, right? He really believed in it, and he always tells me even now that he was right. This is why I like made it in America. Your English is better and you survived and you got through school in America. It's because you didn't make friends in China. You didn't waste your time doing that, which make no sense, right? Like sometimes I look back and I regret not having made some of those connections that could have still be here today. That's for me personally. So I think loneliness is always there. We don't really talk about it because it's a stigma for us to talk about feeling alone or feeling like we need more connections. And I think it's gendered in many ways, right? Like men in particular are more afraid to have those conversations with other men. For me, recently, it's been a lot of, oh, we're playing like video games together online. Now we can talk on Discord. But does that really solve the issue of loneliness, right? Like there's this giant void in my heart and that an hour of Discord chat is going to help with, right? So I think there's something about in-person, face-to-face conversations like we're having now that's missing in general because everybody's on their screens and on their phones, on their devices, and we're not really thinking about what it means to communicate and coexist anymore.
Yeah, I think the screens and the video games and social media is probably the biggest contributing factor to the loneliness epidemic that we're going through. And we'll get to that in a minute, but I want to first return to your story of your time back in China. And it seems like your worldview was painted in a way where you had to choose one or the other. And I definitely believe that there are trade-offs in life, and choosing to do one thing means you must sacrifice another. But I wonder if you still believe that you have to choose one extreme. That do I need to only work on my schoolwork to make it, or do I only have to pursue friendship and I won't achieve any of the external success? Is it always a case where you have to choose one extreme? Because I think there are subtle benefits at being social as to your life that obviously you'll feel happier, but maybe even the fact that you feel happier contributes to your work as well. So I wonder if you still believe that you have to choose one or the other, or have you found that there's more of a blend that being social and working on your goals can somehow improve your life in an even better way?
For sure, right? You mentioned that being happy can make you like work better as well, right? I think definitely. There's definitely a false dichotomy there in terms of choosing one extreme over the other. I think a lot of my decisions in high school and college and grad school was based off of my like rebellion against my dad and his philosophy that it must be one or the other. So in college, I had three majors. I was in student government. I wrote for the newspaper. I did choir and a cappella. I was in musical theater. I played Quidditch and tennis. Like I did everything, right? I really didn't care what I wanted to study or wanted to do or what looked good on a sheet of paper, right? So I went to college and I said, okay, what would make me happy? I really want to take philosophy classes. So let's start with one. And then I really liked it. So let's do a whole major in it. You want to do sports? Okay, great. What sport can you do? So I signed up for all the clubs and all the activities, and that made me happy, right? And in turn, I did better academically because of it, because I found a balance where I knew if I spent time doing something that I love, then afterwards I'll feel more at peace with spending some time on homework, right? Otherwise, if I'm doing homework all day and I'm thinking about going outside and playing tennis, then I'm never going to do my homework well. Whereas if I dedicate an hour of time a week or more time every day to play some tennis with friends, then afterwards I feel much better doing homework. So I think that definitely helps. I went through a semester in college right before COVID where I got up, well, I went to bed at like 8:30, 9 o'clock every night, got up by 4:30, would like do some work, read, go to the gym, get back, shower by like 7 o'clock, go get breakfast, and 8 o'clock go to classes. And that was like the happiest I've felt in a very long time because I felt this balance, right? Like even though getting up is always annoying that early, but like I knew it was at that time a right thing to do for me to get up, get the exercise in, and then being able to start the day on a very strong note where I'm on top of my work, where I'm happy with, how the day started. I'm not always thinking about what's the next thing I have to get to because I've already finished my gym. I've already read for fun. So I just have to worry about schoolwork. So I think it's all about finding that balance for yourself and finding time to do the things that you love that will make you happy. I always prioritize that over schoolwork in some ways.
Yeah, and to me that sounds like an amazing life where you're spending pretty much all the hours in your day doing things you love with people you love. Like you couldn't ask for anything better than that. But I think what the problem with screens is that if you can get so much satisfaction and fulfillment in the moment by playing an hour of video games, and what's the need to go out and do things in the real world? And while I think the screens can provide a sense of satisfaction in the present moment, I think it starts to deteriorate your life overall because you're not actually doing anything, right? You're just sat there on your phone or just moving your hands, right? So where do you think we went wrong and how can we go right?
Whoa, that's a big question. Um, I don't think screens are necessarily bad, right? I think it's a way to express or like it's a way for you to carve out some time for yourself, and it's a hobby, right? I think there's definitely too much, something that's too much of screen time, right? If you're averaging 12 hours of phone time a day, like some of my students are, and they showed me their like screen that their like stats on their phone. That's a little concerning that you're spending basically every hour of your waking moment on your phone. That's a little concerning. There's benefits, just like an hour or two of whatever that you want to do with your devices every day. But I think where we went wrong probably is this idea that like instant gratification, right? There's almost everything you can do on the screen. Last night I had extra help actually. I had a student who was like, "Oh, I have this $500 Amazon gift card and I finished my math homework. So I'm just gonna sit here and scroll on Amazon." And then 10 minutes later, she spent $300. She like bought $300 worth of stuff, which is crazy to me because I don't think I've spent that much money this year on Amazon because I don't need that much stuff, right? And I'm not sure that she needs all the stuff that she bought either. But it's so easy, right? You can just go on your phone and click two buttons and whatever you want will get delivered to your door tomorrow. I think there's a lot of instant gratification, whether from games or social media or like shopping apps, right? I think social media is a whole other issue where you're in this mindset of I need approval, I need external validation from others. I have to post something, and every 5 minutes I need to check back and see, did my friends like it? Did this person see it? Oh, if they saw it, what does that mean? If they liked it at this time of the day, what does that mean, right? You think too much about what other people think about you, which becomes an issue. And then next thing you know, you're spending 12 hours a day on your phone, waiting for the next text, waiting for the next message, waiting for your Amazon package to get delivered. And I think perhaps that's a big part of where we went wrong. I don't want to think things became too easy for us, but in some ways, you don't have to work hard for a lot of things. And you can get a lot done in your own bed or seat on your phone. And that's a little scary to me, which sounds make me sound like a boomer, but like I grew up without a smartphone for the first half of my life, right? I didn't see an iPhone till middle school, sixth, seventh grade. My mom got the first iPhone 4, and I was like, whoa, that's really cool. There's no buttons. How do you text? And it was a whole exploration period about, oh, this is like the games that you play. This is what the phone's like these days. But I never saw it as like a necessity, right? Because I didn't have one of those phones till I was in high school. And even then, it was like my dad will always warn me about the dangers of a smartphone, right? You don't want to spend too much time there. You got to put it away when you do work and when you go to sleep. So I guess I was raised differently from my brother, for example, who's 12 right now, and he got his own smartphone like 2 years ago. My mom's reasoning was that, oh, he can call us and text us and we can see where he is if he ever gets lost or whatever. But then he spends almost all of his time after dinner, after homework time on his phone, right? He's watching streamers, he's donating money to people. And where do you get the money, right? I don't get it. So he's always on his phone because it's so easy, because there's so much there that keeps him stimulated in a way. Yeah, and it's hard to say what the long-term effects would be.
I think before in the past, to feel a sense of reward, to feel like satisfied in any way, it required work or it required something that required you to feel alive. Like even if you go back to hunter-gatherer societies, they felt a sense of internal satisfaction and reward. Or they experienced dopamine when they like hunt the animal and got the food, and that's what satisfied them. But I think that's also what keeps you going because if you felt rewarded for sitting there and not going out and hunting the deer, you'd die off. But the problem today is that you're rewarded for doing nothing. Like, why would someone choose to go to the gym when he could access so much dopamine sitting on his bed? And considering how our reward systems and everything we've evolved to be for not millions, like hundreds of thousands of years, it's like these, I think the companies have created the apps in such a way to leverage that and addict us, which is why it's one's a lot. Like, have you seen anyone in this world who like doesn't have a phone or is unable to go off their phone? It's like we can say they're addicted to it, but they're like, oh, I'm fine, I'm okay. But in truth, they can't live without it. And the truth is because they've been hijacked. I do think that is a problem. And it connects to the piece we were talking about before with social connections, right? Because we're the most social animal, right? There's other social animals as well, but there's something so unique about humans as social animals. And I think the reason for that is because we evolved, our strength was collaboration. Our strength was not some physical appearance or some other tactic, right? Like if we had a singular human fight a bear, the bear would, like a polar bear, the bear would win, right? It's not like the human had any advantage over the bear, but the reason humans came and conquered the world is because they were able to utilize their skills of collaboration. But that also means that if the tribe doesn't like you, if the tribe leaves you behind, you'll die. And all the dopamine circuits in our body have been evolved in a way to tell us that you need people in your life or else you're going to die. And couple that with the fact that you're rewarded for not going out and being social. You're rewarded for sitting there in a room and watching TV and playing video games. But at the same time, it builds up into the sense of loneliness because your body also feels that if you don't have those connections, you're probably going to die and you need to do something about it. I think that is probably the source, at least from the stories you're saying, telling me right now, the source of this unhappiness, loneliness, mental health crisis. I think that's the source. But what do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
So my firm belief, and based off of what you said, right? It's this like undertone of like late stage capitalism that is at play here, right? The idea is that software companies, these app companies, are designing these things for their own profit. They're not really worried about implications of what happens when these softwares get pushed out, like TikTok, right? Like they make a lot of money, so they're not really worried about how long people are spending each day on their apps. Otherwise, they'll set a timer, say you can only spend 5 hours on our app before we like lock you out. They're never going to do that because they make money from more people using it. The more the better, right? And so economic profit drives a lot of that, like more development of more softwares. And for humans too, right? We emphasize hyper productivity. We talk about you have to like work really hard because money is important. You have to do all these things because you need to be like better than others. And in a way, that makes us lonelier, right? Because we're always locked in on reward. We're always locked in on these things. So doesn't matter what you want to do, right? Like you're stuck because you want to like be efficient in what you do, right? I have a friend who play video games and he has like four different accounts because he's like, I'm not really having fun, but if I get like the daily win, I get a bit bigger like bonus for, the first win of the day. So I have to get a win on all of my four accounts because that's more efficient because that makes me more efficient as a player. And I never understood it, right? He's just like, I'm optimizing my playing time to get the most out of it. But he's not having fun. He's only doing it because he's maximizing the fictional money that he's gaining, which I don't really understand. But I think that's all of this is a pattern of like capitalism's motivating us to give up our own well-being to like be efficient, to be profitable, to be whatever, right? And I see that point about how easy it is to get dopamine from the couch and not go to the gym, right? For sure. And I think part of that is because companies who make video games are doing a better job with PR than companies who build gyms, right? Because you don't open a gym and have ads for people to be like, come to our gym for whatever rewards. It's just like, here's a gym. If you choose to come to the gym. But video games is like, oh, join our video game. We'll give you this much good stuff for free. And, there's all the flashy things and you're going to be so cool compared to your friends. So that's a big part of it. Right. Like I don't remember the last time I saw an ad for a gym, but I've seen, I don't know, 100 ads for a game every day, right? Every time I open my phone, there's an ad somewhere for a software or for a game. So yeah, I think it's hard because it's hard for us to get out of this cycle of living in the late stage capitalism nightmare. But that's a whole other issue.
Would you mind moving your mic a little bit more straight? I think it's, yeah, that's good. Yeah, let's talk about video games. Um, I used to be a big gamer too, and I think it correlates with my COVID story where we're all at home. It's all I can really do. So my time playing video games has grown at that time. But then over the years, there was a point where I quit video games and I'm not playing in a long time. And you mentioned that it doesn't make sense when you saw your friend who was trying to optimize his victory in the game. He's not even having fun anymore. Like, what's the point? I think what video games have done is they gave mostly men, because I think that the community of people who play video games is mostly guys. There's obviously girls who play the video game as well, but I think why guys have such a drive towards video games is because it gives them a sense of status. It gives them a sense of victory. And I guess in a world where they're not able to access a sense of status or victory, they're not able to access a sense of power or pride in something they've achieved or something they've done, considering the amount of testosterone they produce and like how they're primarily designed, it offers them something the world doesn't offer them. And obviously there's levels to it. There might be people who say, oh yeah, but like they might think we're talking about the people that are sitting in their mom's basement when they're 20, just playing for 8 hours a day. But I think this category of people also encapsulates just people that might play for an hour a week or 2 hours a week. Like they're obviously driven to those video games because in the video game they're a dragon slayer and they're a champion and they have all the status and they have friends and everything. But in the real world, it's just like a place where they're not able to access that. So yeah, what are your own experiences with video games? Have you played video games before in your past, or do you still play, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a part of that being like an escape from reality, right? But I think the same reason that people watch TV shows or movies, right? Like I enjoy movies a lot, and I used to play video games more than I do today. But like I watch movies where I read books because I want to like get away from my work or my job, right? So in a fictional world of a movie, it's like, oh, I can spend 2 hours in this other world where I watch whatever superheroes, like Spider-Man doing cool things. That's kind of nice. Um, I see that interesting point about in a video game, but right, like you are Spider-Man, in a sense, you're getting status and power that you wouldn't get in the real world. And that's kind of nice. I wonder what the implication is that like you're doing that in a video game because you can't do that in a real life, right? So in a way, it's like a power trip. Like I really enjoy, like when kids play GTA, it's like, yeah, I can just beat up pedestrians and be okay with it because we can't do that in real life. A lot to unpack there. But yeah, I think I definitely used to play when I was a kid. Again, I had a PS2. That was my first console when it came out. And my dad would be like, no, 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 no. You can only play so much a week, right? Before we like take it away and hide somewhere. Like they hid it below the heaters. I will find it in the heaters. Um, so yeah, my brain will like constantly be thinking about it when I'm not playing, especially when I was like 13 and 14. It's like, oh, I gotta go back and do homework now. But all I want to think about is, oh, the next time I'm gonna go back to video games. These are all the things I want to do. Because there's so many possibilities, and it's like this whole world where I can be someone else and have powers and status, right? And I think it took years for me to really, I think during COVID actually, when I got my PS4, after so many years of not having a video game console, where I was like, okay, there's a balance here, right? There's an escape, there is a sense of relief in some ways from all the tension from your work and your job, but you shouldn't be spending so much time on it because other stuff are important too, right? When I was in my dorm room alone with the TV and a PS4 and my laptop for homework, junior year of college, it's like, great, I can sit here and play games all day, literally, because I finished my homework. There's not much, school is easy. I can sit here for 12 hours and beat this game today. But then what, right? Eventually, I ran out of video games, but the world hasn't moved on. Like, I haven't interacted with the actual world, right? I haven't talked to people. I haven't, like, seen a human being. I haven't literally have not seen a human being. I'm just at my screen. Like I saw that was a little dangerous, right? Like it was so easy for me to jump into this hole again and just be like, let's beat this game, buy a new one, beat that one. I can beat a game a day and finish the entire library in a week. But then what? All right. Or it's in the real world, it's like, oh, I can meet friends. I can go have coffee with them. I can talk to them, go on a podcast. And then what? Well, but then there's a bunch of other stuff I can do, right? It's like a video game, but better and more realistic and more open world. Like literally, video games are trying to emulate the world, and it fails because there's so much in the world that you can do. And that's kind of my mindset now, right? Like sometimes I'll play video games for an hour, and my character would, run however many miles. And I'm like, you know what? I need to go outside and do that, right? I can train like my character. That's kind of cool. Instead of vice versa, right? Instead of my character has power, so I don't have to do anything. My mindset is like, okay, my character can do these things. So why don't I want to do those things? I'm gonna go to the gym and like lift because then I can do these cool parkour stuff and run fast and, like go hunt a polar. I'm not gonna hunt a polar bear, but like, right, it would be cool if I could in the real world. So I use video games now almost like a motivation for myself to get better at what I do, right? Yeah.
When you mentioned that you use video games, or not even video games, but like a fiction story or a book as an escape, I think that's totally fine, right? Because I don't think it's healthy to spend all your time with your work and using things, whether it be like reading a nice book that's really entertaining to you, or watching a show with like your family where it's like a social aspect, or it's going on a hike in the mountains. Like I think having periodically time set away from things is healthy for sure. Um, but I was thinking back to the other thing you said about how you're thinking about it all the time, right? And that draws a line between a form of escape versus a form of like now this is your whole life, right? And I've noticed in my own past, I get really obsessive with things, which I guess is a good thing because when I get obsessive with my goals, then it's like that's all I do and it's fun. But when I get start playing a video game and I get obsessive in that, I can see periods of time like throughout all of COVID, I'm just playing Call of Duty Warzone and Minecraft all day and every day. And all I can think about is like the farms I'm going to build or whatever that might be. So yeah, I guess when you talk about your story at college, it really shows the other side of the coin because there's this one life where you're all you can think about is like Minecraft and Call of Duty and these video games. But then there's you in college who's like, I'm triple majoring, I'm doing philosophy, math, physics just because for the hell of it, because I enjoy it. Plus, I'm going out and being social, I'm playing tennis, I'm doing all these things. And to me, that's a very fulfilling life, you know? Because you're able to go out and do things. You're able to go and experience world, have life experiences while making progress toward the goals that you chose that are meaningful to you, that are separate from the external success, right? Because then obviously you're pursuing college for the sake of hopefully landing a job and making money in the future, but there's also a different aspect of it where you're able to have those life experiences, right? So I think for people that maybe listening and maybe see themselves in a similar place where they lack that sense of satisfaction in life and they spend a lot of their time on the video games. I think the getting off of video games is probably one of the habits it's easier compared to like I think dieting and maybe limiting social media use because I think the video games are very easily replaceable, right? Where if you're obsessed with the video game, you can get obsessed with the gym or going on runs or trying a sport. But yeah, I think definitely when I started doing more with my life, instantly like the amount of times that some of the video games just like dramatically decrease as well.
Yeah, right. Like now I'm so busy with things that I do here that I enjoy doing that I don't really have time for video games. I don't really think about it, right? Unless I'm really bored during break. It's like, oh, okay, you know what? I can hop on whatever game and play with some friends for a while. But otherwise, right? Like I'm busy with my dog. I can go for walks. There's all kinds of cool stuff in the area. There's no reason for me to, I don't want to say waste my time, but in a way, but waste my time in a fictional world, right? Like that's great that it's there. And I'm proud of what I've built in the last 10 years in this other world of video games. But there's things I need to work on in the real world, right? I could make more money. I could get my dog more toys. I could go learn to cook, to bake, to do all kind of things that will actually benefit me in the real world. And that's fulfilling. So I definitely see what you mean. I'm really glad I did all the things I did in college because I think that was genuinely the happiest time of my life so far. I know people always say college is the happiest time of your life for whatever reasons, right? For me, it was genuinely because I did all the things I really wanted to do. And that has informed me, that made me who I am today. But the problem is now I want to do all kinds of stuff and I don't have time for it, right? Because of work. I genuinely don't have time for it. And that's all right. I have to pick and choose what I like the most. And that's all right.
You mentioned that one of your values was self-awareness and consciousness. Just talk to me about that.
Uh, Critical consciousness and self-awareness, right? Well, to me, it all begins with like you have to be aware of who you are, right? Your identities as a person. I've spent a long time running away from who I was and my values, especially when we first immigrated to America. It was all about assimilation of blending in, right? oh, you know what? I don't really speak Chinese. I can speak English. Don't worry about it, right? Like, I want to be your friend and I don't want to be different. And it took me forever, again, till college for me to realize how important that part of myself is, right? Like my culture, my ethnicity, my history, my family, and my food, right? Those are important things. So I think being aware of that is where it all got started. And then it became like awareness of your impact on others, right? How much space you're taking at dinner, how much work are you making other people to do for you? How much work are you doing for others? I think that's really important as like a collaboration, like a social animal aspect of you want to know what your contribution is to the community that you live in. You want to know what you ask of others. You want to know how you can help others. And you want to know when you're being like a roadblock for others, right? And be aware of that and address those issues as they come up. And that's always like who I try to be and who I look for in friends, right? People who care for others, who are aware of themselves and their own values and can talk about those openly rather than avoiding all those and like pretending to be someone they're not just because they want to be cool or be someone else. So I think that's really what I meant by self-awareness. And critical consciousness stems from that and talks about knowing who you are, what are some things you can do, right? You see issues in society, and how can you use your skills to address those issues, right? Me as a teacher will address those issues differently than my friends who are going to med school, right? We're going to address different issues because we have different values, and that's okay. But we're all doing something positively for society that otherwise we wouldn't be doing, right? If I just go to work every day and not really think about my role in the bigger society, then I don't really see the reason of me working, right? Sure, I make money and I save up money for retirement, but if I don't see the point of why I'm teaching, then I don't see why I will be teaching in the first place.
How do you think we gain and lose self-awareness? And what are the tools we can use to be more self-aware? And I want to go back to the story you mentioned with your time in China, because maybe a connection I can see is that when your life path was designed for you and you're told that you can only work, maybe you lack self-awareness because you spent so much time trying to fulfill this external um, idealized life for you. And maybe your time coming back to America, as you mentioned, allowed you to be more self-aware about what you genuinely like. So do you think that is the biggest driver for what allowed you to gain self-awareness, or what do you think has allowed you to gain self-awareness over the years?
Well, I think upbringing is definitely a big part of it, right? But I was always rebellious. I'm the oldest kid in my family. Even though people are like, oh, the oldest kid never rebels, like I always rebelled, right? I always disagree. I had really strong feelings about things, and I always wanted to push back on authority. I have a thing with authority. So yeah, for me, I think self-awareness came because at a very early age, I realized how I disagreed with people around me or I was different in ways, right? People will go along with whatever the teacher says. And I'll be like, wait a second, that doesn't really make any sense. Why are we doing this again? Right? Like, why do we have to line up before we go anywhere in kindergarten? Like genuinely, I think that was one of my earliest memories of being like, that doesn't really make sense. Why is it alphabetical? Why are we lining up this way? We have to hold hands to walk outside after school. Wait a second. Right, but that's just like an awareness of literally the awareness of yourself compared to the world. And eventually it became a self-awareness in the sense of like, here are my values. It doesn't align with people around me. What does that mean? Am I hanging out with the people that I want to hang out with? Should I like look elsewhere to find my circle? Right? And then the critical question is, should I always be hanging out with people who share similar values as me? Which is an important question that I don't think I have an answer for, right? Sure, it's comfortable living with people, only people who share exactly the same views as you and exact same values as you. But is that healthy, right? Should I meet other people who are different, who make me uncomfortable once in a while, who push me to think about things and question things, right? It's easy to get complacent with, right? Like, oh, great, we all agree on these issues. That's perfect. We don't have to worry about anything. So I think that's a flip side of self-awareness. You get, right? Like you get too comfortable, you forget about why you did all the things to begin with. I don't think that answers your question, but yeah.
I think for most of my childhood, I haven't been very self-aware. And I know you describe yourself as a very rebellious child. I guess I was more of accepting that, okay, I guess these are the way things are. Um, these are the way people act. This is what I'm supposed to do. And I didn't really have a problem with that growing up. I was like, okay, We go to school, we go have our fun, like it's okay, this is life. And I think I gained self-awareness over time. I know I mentioned that I had a tendency to conform early on, but I think when you spend most of your time just distracted, it's hard to have a self-awareness, right? And I got my phone like in sixth, seventh grade pretty early on. So that's most kids have. I mean, if you have like a 4 hour screen time, how much time do you really sit there thinking about to yourself, right? I mean, if the hint of boredom you scroll, then how much self-awareness do you really have? And I think in the last year I've gained more self-awareness and I'm happy with that. And I think I read this book that helped me in that transition. Have you heard of the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari? I have. Yeah, I read that book, and the reason it started to help me develop self-awareness was because a big theme in the book was showing how everything in this world is kind of an imagined order, he describes it as, right? That the United States doesn't actually exist. It's just a story we tell ourselves, right? Or Peddie doesn't actually exist. It's just a story we all agree on. And because we all agree on it, we can collaborate on it. And when I started to question, I think that's when I started to question things around me. Like, why do I believe this thing? Who put this belief in my head? Or why do I just accept these things as true? And I think at the same time, when I read a lot of these similar type of content and watched similar type of podcasts, I think it led me down a track of me starting to rebel, as you mentioned in your own life, where I'm like, I feel like this is not the right way to live, and I feel like there should be a better way to live, right? I don't think sitting on my phone all day is the best way to live, so I took action and I fixed that part of my life, and I think this last year and from 2023, from last winter till now, I've just been trying to fix aspects of my life, like whether that be like improving my mental health, right? I one of the biggest achievements I think is I lowered my screen time to 20 minutes, which I was really proud about, and obviously you're having a conversation with people. Some people are like, that's just crazy, right? Some people are inspired by it, but it's definitely different. And I think that part of it will make you question like, am I living the right way if if no one else around me is also living this way? But I think that I've also started journaling about a year ago. And when you journal every day for a year, you start to understand like who you are. And you start to realize that your own beliefs contradict your own beliefs. And you can read a journal from a month ago, and you will forget that your mind even was even thinking thoughts like that. And then you'll realize that some of the problems that you thought that you're or in your life right now you've never dealt with before, you've dealt with like 100 times before, and you just forgot about it. And I think that self-awareness that I achieved through journaling as well and through reading these kind of books, it helped me to question the world in more way. And I think I was able to develop that side of it as well.
Well, I think what you're describing right now is exactly why I end up doing a major in philosophy, right? Because it's all about questioning, learning how to question and thinking about issues like, why do I believe these things? Do I have beliefs of these things? Am I justified in believing these things? And also because philosophy is just about sitting there and thinking, right? So I did a thesis in philosophy of science where, my friends were in labs taking data on their computers, coding, and I was like, oh, for my research, I went on a 2 hour long walk and I thought about things and I came up with new thoughts and I wrote about it. And that was my thesis. Right. So I really enjoyed that aspect of like completely offline, literally just in my mind thinking about things and questioning my own thoughts. Right. Like you said, yesterday I can be like, oh, I really believe in A. And the next day I'll think about it more and be like, well, actually, I was completely wrong yesterday. This is why. And the next day I'll question that until I get to somewhere where I'm like, okay, I'm happy with this conclusion that I arrived at. So I really I mean, I push philosophy to everybody that I talk to because this line of inquiry, this idea, this mindset of questioning and constant examination of things around you, I think it's a good mindset to have, whether you like become a philosopher or not, right? Like it helps me today to question policies we have at school or as a system, right? In the system or just individual choices, right? If I can be like, well, I really want to not go to the gym, and then I can be like, oh, why do you want to go to the gym? What's the point of going to the gym? Did you pay for the gym membership? Right? I can question myself and justify reasonably why I should go to the gym and convince myself. So yeah, I really think what you're talking about, this idea of self-awareness and questioning is really important for everybody to have.
Is there such a thing as too much self-awareness? And I say that because I've noticed a lot of people that are interested in philosophy, whether it be me or you or a lot of people I've seen online, sometimes like thinking has helped them solve a lot of their life problems. But thinking is also the source of a lot of their life problems. And there's such a thing as overthinking, as we all know about. So have you ever felt you fall into a zone of overthinking, or do you struggle with that?
All the time, of course, right? My therapist tells me to think less because I'm always thinking about plan G and F and whatever, plan Z. And it's like, no, plan A worked out just fine. You're great. When I was at Lafayette, our math department was on the second floor of like the equivalent of Annenberg, and the third floor was philosophy and languages. And my math professors always make fun of me for going up to the third floor right after math for philosophy classes. And one of my favorite jokes came from one of my professors, my real analysis professor. And she said, right, like one day a philosopher ran down from the third floor, and I was like, wait, guys, like everybody in the math department, stop working. I just found this issue in math that fundamentally changes everything. Like nothing you do matters because this one issue in the foundation of mathematics. And then everybody ignored him, went back to work. 10 years later, the same guy runs back downstairs, like, oh, don't worry, guys, I figured it out. The problem is solved. You can keep going on doing your math. Everybody was like, great, we never paid attention to you in the first place, right? Like the philosopher will do that. And that does happen for many, many philosophers in the world, which is why I didn't end up going to get a PhD in philosophy because it's a little much, right? At some point, it became like, what's the point? Like, I get thinking and questioning, but at some point, it gets so esoteric and pointless that I don't see it as beneficial anymore, right? In a way, it becomes like a video game. You're always in your room on your chair thinking about things that doesn't really relate or matter to 99.9% of people in the world. I rather think more about the bigger issues and act on those issues than just sitting there and thinking. So yes, I think too much self-awareness will almost paralyze you into like inaction, right? You're always thinking, you're always questioning, and you're not doing anything about it. I can sit there and reason about why I should go to the gym and never walk into the gym. But at some point I need to stop being so self-aware and just get my ass into the gym. Right. So yeah.
And I think it goes to a broader question of not just deep thinkers, but everyone in general, how our mind has a tendency to think a lot about the past and the future and never living in the present.
Yeah.
So, what are ways you found over the years that have helped you turn off your brain? And have you ever found anything that can help you turn off your brain for a little bit of time? Or, I mean, it's a challenge. So,
That's a great question. Meditation helps. I use Headspace. Teachers and students now get free Headspace. Y'all should get it. Um,
how do you provide it?
No, the app is just free. If you have like a school email address, they'll give you a subscription for free. And you have all kinds of meditations for different things, right? You can do it for anxiety, do it for like restlessness, do it for any sort of things. So I think meditation helps. It's literally about being in the present, following your breath, checking with your body, and not worrying about things going outside, right? For us in class, we do blob trees, which is not where it's not a direct translation, but the fundamental idea is that we're spending time to like pause and check in with our bodies and how we're doing in a day. And talking about it actually, research shows helps, right? Talking about how you're feeling helps you to be more aware, to be more mindful, to be more in line with your body. Um, just getting away from screens, going back to the idea of screens. I think getting away from your devices helps. Going for a walk, right? Like I realize that sometimes, like last year when I walk with Toby, my brain is thinking about work. I'm like, okay, when I get back home after this walk, I'm going to send these 3 emails and then do this thing and then do this. And that's a problem, right? I need to stop thinking about those things and just enjoy the walk as it is. So what that looks like for me is like focusing on like the scents or the smells or just the feelings of my feet touching the ground, being mindful when I'm walking, right? Which turns out to be really hard because every 20 seconds my brain naturally goes back to, okay, what do you need to do when you get back? Again, that goes back to what I brought up earlier about this like hyper-productive late stage capitalism society. We're always working about working and worried about the next thing and the next thing and not being in the present. So yeah, forcing yourself to step outside of that mindset and really taking a pause on the things that happen. Right. My therapist will say, go stare at a wall. Literally go stare at a wall for half an hour a day. That will help you. You shouldn't be thinking so much. Just go stare at a white wall and just notice. What do you notice? What do you wonder? Right. Don't have to think about your calendar or your to-do list or anything like that, which is hard because we all have so much going on and you don't want to do that. Right. It's like, why would I waste half an hour staring at a wall when I could be emailing or reading a book about whatever that will train me to do the next thing better? But I think it's important, right? Like if you're not mindful, you're not spending time for your mind, then you can't use your mind to do other things that you want to do because you're always exhausted, you're always falling behind. So taking that time out during the day is important.
Yeah, I'm big on meditation, mindfulness. I think it's really important, as you've mentioned. In addition to that, I think one of the biggest things that's helped me has been wrestling, surprisingly, right? And I think most people want to look at some like difficult sport as somehow helping them with their mental health, but I think definitely one like the whenever work gets hard, like winter term, like that's the thing I look forward to all day because I guess I've come to realize that when you're wrestling, it's difficult, right? Whether you're sprinting in practice or you're doing something difficult, but it forces you for an hour and a half to focus on something in the present moment, which is like when you're meditating, you can try to focus on your breath, but your mind will start to wander. But some activity, I think I've heard people call it a flow state activity that can just ground you in the present moment that I guess people like athletes will call like they're in the zone or they're locked in. Yeah. It's basically like you're so absorbed in the present moment by the task that it's like your brain turns off. And I think that's such a beautiful thing I found that even like in the future, if even if I'm not pursuing wrestling as a sport or getting better at it, even just one wrestling practice a week is good for your mental health, which I don't think I've heard a lot of people talk about that, pursuing some of these difficult, hard things is also just good for your mental state on a day-to-day basis. So
Yeah, right. That brings a couple more things for me. I do boxing. I go to a boxing gym in the area, and that helps, right? Like an hour every other day, I go and I hit the heavy bag for an hour with a coach. And that's great, right? Like I don't think about anything. My brain doesn't have the capacity to think about work when I'm like literally sweating and just ready to pass out, or literally because I'm working so hard. And that's great, right? It's therapeutic in a way. If I really wanted to, it's almost like anger management. Like it's helpful, right? I can think about all the work and all the things I can worry about and just punch it out. Literally, right? And that's what my coach says. You're not here because you want to have a good time. You're here because you want to like be better and you want to like let all that tension out. Also I started doing a lot of baking. I do sourdough bread baking, which turns out to be surprisingly soothing and therapeutic, right? Because like on the second I do a 3-day recipe, like it's not easy, right? It takes forever. And on a second day, you have to spend 4 hours with the dough that you made on the first day to like fold it and rise it and like observe it and fold it more. So it's a lot of like you're literally just in the kitchen nonstop kneading the dough and folding the dough and watching it rise. And there's this magical sense of like watching something, right? Like literally grains of wheat that we harvested from the earth to like grow into this loaf of bread that you eat on the next day. That's really like comforting, right? And you're in the moment, you're just coexisting with this blob of bread dough, and somehow, right, you're in the zone. Literally, I was in the zone and I would just fold the bread for 4 hours. And next thing you know, you're ready to bake. And then you get food, you get delicious food after. So, yeah, whatever works to help you get in the zone, I think that's very important.
you mentioned a couple of times that you've met with a therapist, and I'm curious, what are some of the earliest factors or motivators that drove you to get a therapist? Because it's something that I've been interested in recently. And the reason is because I always thought there was a stigma around therapy as like something that you do if like you're like severely depressed and if you're doing therapy, like something's wrong with you. But I think I've recently learned that it's a very common thing to do just because it's kind of like journaling on steroids. Like it's literally just like you're telling someone your problems so you can understand them better. So in what ways has it helped you in your life? And what were some of the early motivating factors that led you to do that?
Yeah, my philosophy is always that everybody could benefit from therapy, right? And I think everybody should go to therapy. Um, I wanted to get a therapist since I was in college, right? I think it's always important to talk about things, right? For me, I think it's about I was in a hard STEM field for most of my days in college, physics and math and philosophy, and people there refuse to talk about how they're doing, how they're feeling. And I always had these feelings and I had nowhere to let them out, right? And I was like, oh, I really want to talk to someone about how I'm doing today because there's so much on my mind that I want to just let it out. And I had nowhere to really let it out besides like going on a walk and talking to my dog, which doesn't really help, right? So when I got a job, when I got out of college, I went to grad school and then, lived on my own, got a job, it became, oh, okay, I can actually hire someone, sometimes free of charge based on your insurance. They will listen to me and give me feedback and talk back to me about how I'm doing. And that's really important and helpful, right? And I think therapy has helped me highlight issues that I don't even see in my life, right? Like recently I was like, I'm always tired. I'm always like catching up to the tasks that I have to do. Like I'm not doing enough. I don't think, right? Like I'm working so hard and I'm always tired. My therapist was like, how many hours are you sleeping a night? And I was like, well, I went to bed at 1:30 and got up at 6. And she was like, yeah, that's probably why you're not sleeping enough, right? And that was I never thought about that. And I was like, well, that's natural. I was doing work and I was being productive. And it's this conversation we had about sleeping is productive too, right? You need to rest your mind and your body before you can go on to conquer the next day. If you're always working, that's not productive anymore because your work is going to be lower quality because your brain is barely awake, right? We've all been there. We study all night and you take a test the next day and you do horribly because your brain is exhausted. So yeah, that's a lesson I learned recently. Sleeping is productive. You need a rest before you can go on and do more, right? These are things that therapy can help you figure out and highlight that you may not realize, right? I was like, oh, I really want to talk about how I can be more productive. And the answer was like sleep, which I don't think I can ever reason myself into by just thinking on my own, right? So having this other person who's trained and knows like these things helps.
I think one of the other benefits I've heard about therapy is that I always thought that it's like you make a list of problems, you go to your therapist, say, this is the problem I have, and she gives you the solution, you go home. I thought that was like what I encapsulated in my mind. But I think when I realized more of it, it's not really that. And I was reading this book by Jordan Peterson that really got me thinking about this, that he was talking about how just talking, just saying things out loud is one of the most therapeutic things you can do. Because what a therapist does is they don't give you solutions to your problems. They just reflect their own thoughts back at you, right? Like they'll hear you talk for 30 minutes and then they'll ask you a question that just gets you to think more. And it's like basically you're digging inside yourself with the help of someone else who's simply just like there as a mirror, just like holding a mirror up and helping you to reflect your own thoughts back at you. So would you say that you've seen it in that way as well?
Absolutely. And I'm going to make a really cheesy connection here to teaching. This is what we try to do as teachers, right? Whether MPS 1 or our multivariable calculus class, right? I could lecture at you for an hour, but it's not nearly as helpful as if I give you a bunch of problems. You go talk to each other. And once in a while, I stop by and I just redirect the question back to you, right? It's about talking. It's about like having that social aspect of doing whatever you're doing. And that helps, right? Like, nothing that I got out of therapy came from the therapist, right? Like, in a way, like she's not like, here's your to-do list, here's the answers to your question. It's, oh, let's just talk about how you're doing. Oh, okay. By the way, what do you think about this? What do you think you can do to change that? Right? She'd be like, what do you think you can do to like get more sleep? I'll be like, well, maybe I can cut down the time that I'm spending at night after I finish my work to like, on my phone or on my computer, right? Maybe I can just go straight to bed. Maybe I can get up later or whatever, right? So yeah, that reflective practice is really important. And again, I think same way in the classroom, it's about reflecting it back to the students rather than centering it on the authority, on the teacher or the therapist.
I want to transition to another problem that you mentioned we have in the world today. And it is a problem with polarization. And you mentioned that people struggle to be okay with the fact that there's different ideologies and different views on how to live life. And that's contributed to like the major polarization issue we see in the world today. So again, I'll ask you a similar question to before that. Where did this problem stem from and what can we do about it?
Yeah. As a teacher, I'm always going to say it stems from education, right? We haven't learned how to have conversations with each other. We haven't learned as a species to have productive discourse with each other. Right? Like in the math classroom today, we talk about see if someone gets a different answer than you, what do you do? And oftentimes it's like, oh, okay, I'll just copy your answer because you probably know better than me. Rather than, oh, this is what I did, this is what you did. Let's compare and contrast and see who made a mistake on the way, right? We never learn to disagree with each other. So that now when something deeply, deeply personal happens, and we realize that on a very philosophically personal level that we disagree, we don't know how to disagree with each other, right? I have a vegan friend who always will come up to us and be like, "Shame on you for eating chicken," right? That's terrible. You're gonna go to hell and whatever, right? And there's a lot to be unpacked there, but we are not able to have a productive conversation because she would just say things that she believes and we'll say things that we believe, and neither side can really produce an argument. Or even when we can produce an argument, the other side is not hearing the argument. Or like mindfully dissecting the argument and really responding to the argument. It became a yelling match, right? Every time we talk about it. So now we don't talk about it. The issue is still there. It's not resolved. The difference is still there. And neither side is happy when we see the other side, right? So I think it stemmed from fundamentally our inability to have conversations. And I think because education in the last 3, 4 decades has been centered on the teacher, right? It's like, here's what I think. You should think like I think. This is what you should do, right? Just follow what I have. Just copy down what I write on the board. Think like I think. Like trust authority, right? And then all of a sudden, we talked about self-awareness and this rebellion against authority. And all of a sudden, you get older and it's like, wait a second, why do I believe in you at all, right? Which led to the rise of like anti-vaxxers during COVID, right? Like, why why should I trust the CDC, right? They're just a bunch of people in power who are publishing whatever, and we have to listen to them. Why is that, right? Even though they may have more training in school, even though they might have worked more with these chemicals than we did, do we have to trust them, right? Why can't I do my own research and think about why this is useful? Because we don't know how to have a conversation, right? The other side is like, here's all the evidence and data that we have. And we're like, no, I don't really trust you. I'm going to do my own thing, right? We're not having a conversation. We're just disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing because we want to disagree with each other. And that's difficult. And I don't know, well, I know, but I don't know how long it's going to take for us to train a generation of people to be more capable of having conversations. We try every day, but yeah, it's going to take a long time.
If I made you the prime minister of the world and your first task was to solve this issue, what are some of the things you would do?
If I were the prime minister of the world, then my first task is to help people, to teach people to have conversations. What was the first thing I would do? Well, I feel like I will basically spend a majority of the budget sending to education sector. Surprise, surprise to no one. To like fund the schools, to fund education, to fund the teachers, so that they're better trained to teach students, the younger generation, to be more effective at disagreeing and having those discourses, having conversations, right? Um, I think it's much harder to do that with adults because we're so firmly established in our beliefs, right? Even me with another colleague in the math department, it's hard for us to talk about like educational philosophy, right? What's important? What's the point of testing, right? I might disagree with someone who's like, we should do 3 hour exams every year because that's what get the kids to think. And I can be like, no, I don't think so. What about projects and all the other ways we can attest, we can assess, right? We don't really get to an answer because neither side agrees with the other side, and neither of us have like an argument for why they're wrong and why we're right. So yeah, I think in a way it has to start with the youth. And I think maybe also limiting online time will help, right? It's so easy to disagree with someone online and just scream at them and send all kinds of obscene messages to the other side and be like, "Oh, you're stupid, you're wrong, I'm right, this is why." Like the YouTube comment section, right? You don't really want to scroll down there. Sometimes you see a video and you're like, "Nope, I don't want to see the comments because I know exactly what's going to happen down there." And you're probably right. And it's about like, right, maybe teaching people how to have those conversations or limiting the time people can have those conversations so that they can actually go face to face and have a disagreement instead of just being like being rude and swearing online all the time because that doesn't help anyone with anything.
I think one of the challenges with disagreement is that I think the world by nature is very confusing and chaotic, right? That you grow up and there's all these nuanced factors in the world, and you're constantly worried about what society's telling you how to live and what your parents told you growing up and your traumatized experiences. And you're at the same time in the background, you're wondering like what's the meaning of life. So I think when the world is this confusing, the only thing we can do is try to create order by a set of mental models or mindsets or ideologies that bring us peace. And I think that's why we're so group oriented, right? Why people align themselves to political parties, right? Why people are so obsessed with their sport teams, right? Why people are always trying to change the world around them to fit their beliefs. Because if you hear that your belief is wrong, it's all of a sudden pulling you back to the chaotic world where you don't want to be there. And I think that's a challenge because nobody wants to be there. And we all need mindsets and ideologies and a description of how to live a good life in their head in the background somewhere, or some voice telling us that you're doing the right thing, whether it's an authority figure telling us, yeah, you're doing the right thing. And I think that's why religion is such a big thing, right? People are so inclined to anything that can give them a sense of meaning or order. And because of that, I think it's exacerbated today, although it's been a problem with most of our human history, right? Conflicts related to different stories, basically. um, but yeah, the online thing I think is big, and I think it connects to what we were talking about at the beginning because it's so easy to say things online, but it's so hard to say them in person. And I've heard a lot of famous people talk about how their comment sections are like a war zone, but they've had maybe one or two negative interactions in real life. Like pretty much everyone they meet on the street is like 99% of the time is positive interactions, right? Like famous people talk about it all the time. I guess it exasperates it, right? And I think yelling online also helps you to confirm your beliefs more. And there's a sense of it gives you a sense of security, maybe telling yourself that people are wrong and I'm right. I think that stems that contributes to the issue a lot.
Yeah, insecurity, right? We don't want to disagree in person because oh, if I'm wrong, then that's so embarrassing. But if I send you like a super long message online and you disagree, well, I disappear and you never see me and talk to me again. So insecurity is a big part, right? Which goes back to the mental health crisis. We have strong feelings. We don't know how to say it. We don't know how to express it. We don't know how to disagree with each other. And then we're stuck with our strong feelings. We don't have a lot of friends around us to share these ideas and talk about them with. And then what happens, right? We're alone. We are not part of a pack. We don't know what's right or wrong. So whatever I believe, whatever I see, it's just what I believe. Then all of a sudden you're believing all kinds of crazy stuff that no one else believes. But it's just because you haven't talked to a lot of people about it. Right, which is why it's important as social animals for us to talk, to have open communication about our values, our beliefs, our philosophies. And even if we disagree, it's important to acknowledge that and see the other side. Why do you believe this and I don't? And sometimes that's okay, right? Maybe both sides is right. Both sides are valid, right? You believe this because your upbringing was different than mine. My parents believe like politically they're more right-leaning than I am because they were raised in a society where that helped them to survive and get food and whatever. Whereas it didn't really benefit me to believe things that they believed. And that's okay. We're different. It's just that we have to, right? Like we are a product of our times in a way, but we have to move along with the world. And you can't do that without talking to people and sharing your beliefs and agreeing and disagreeing with people, right? You can't live in your own world and somehow like be a part of the bigger world or change the bigger world because you have no idea what's going on out there. Now you don't know, you'll never know unless you talk to people.
I think that's one of the reasons I love doing the podcasting so much. And I think in the recent 3, 4, 5 years, it's grown significantly, the podcast long form conversations, because I think people are beginning to realize that how negative the media really is and how clickbait and inaccurate news outlets really are. And I think that's why people are more inclined to listening to more people on podcasts. I think podcasts have exploded in the most recent years because it's just two people coming together, having a conversation. And I think one of the other things that makes them special is that I think it trains you more to step out of the zone of listening to respond and more just listening for curiosity. Because right, if you're just sitting here like I'm listening to what you're saying just so I can say something in to respond to it, those podcasts tend to be lower in quality because no one's really listening to what other person's saying. We're both just like saying words at each other, and it's like it's not going anywhere, right? But I think I know it's only been like 21 episodes. So this is the 21st episode we're doing, but I can already see like so much of a transition from when I'm watching the first few ones that it's I do better on the podcast. That I feel like the podcast turn out of higher quality and better when I'm just sitting there and just listening for the sake of curiosity and seeing that what is something I could see in the person that I never knew before. And I think it's changed my relationships with others because people I see every day, whether it's in the math classroom or just at the gym, all of a sudden I know this whole other subset of things and life experiences they've had that I just never saw before. And I think it's definitely improved my life in a lot of way. And I hope that people can, even if they don't have their own podcast, like just going out and having these conversations. Yeah. I think it's very valuable.
I totally agree. I think it's inquisitive, right? We're learning about each other right now, and I think we'll see each other differently when we go back to class. Right, like I think it's important to make space for these conversations. I try to do that in class sometimes to check in with everybody, have you talk to each other. But yeah, we don't know nearly enough about each other, right? Which is why it's hard for us to disagree, for us to have conversations, because who knows what you went through, what I went through, right? So yeah, I definitely agree that having space for conversations, for authentic personal conversations, where it's not just who's right or who's wrong, debating, it's useful and it's important and it helps you to ground yourself, who you are and what you believe in. Yeah.
Goodness is not goodness that seeks advantage. Good is good in the final hour, in the deepest pit, without hope, without witness, without reward. Virtue is only virtue in extremis.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite quotes that I live by. It's from a TV show actually, from Doctor Who, if you watch that. Um, so right, like I as a philosophy student, I think a lot about like what is right, what is just, what is good. And like today, right, especially as a teacher, I see a lot of students in some ways who do things for a benefit, for a reward, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to be nice to you because you're going to give me extra credit. Or if I bring you this snack for class, I see this in MPS 1 a lot. Oh, it's extra help. Oh, look, I bought an extra yogurt. Would you like a yogurt? Because then you can get extra credit, right? Like, would you not give me the yogurt if I wasn't your teacher? If you couldn't get something out of it, right? So I really like the quote because it talks about, right, like deep down, fundamentally, what is good is something that you believe in, that you do without the goal of getting a reward, without being seen, without like, right, you're doing it because you believe it's good and you want to do it, not that because other people will see it and talk about you, not that because you'll get something out of it. And it grounds me and helps me try. I think it keeps me in check sometimes to do things, right? Helps me question why I'm doing certain things. When I was in college and volunteering, we read a piece about like philosophically, what does volunteering mean, right? Is there such a thing as like selfless volunteering? When you volunteer, are you really like doing it out of the goodness of your heart, or are you always thinking about like what you get out of it, right? People who do it for their resume, for whatever, right? Or even like in a truly authentic, like selfless volunteering sense. Are you not doing it because you feel better afterwards about yourself, right? Like, oh, surely you're doing this because you believe in the cause, but isn't it also because afterwards you feel good? And is it wrong to feel good about volunteering? Right? Does that make you a selfish person for like wanting to volunteer because afterwards you know that you feel good about yourself? Right? So there's a delicate balance between doing good deeds and doing good deeds just to feel good about yourself.
What goes the blinds? Hope it doesn't mess up the video. Oh, whatever. Oh, should be fine.
Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes is that you are who you are when no one's watching, right? And that's the best way of figuring out like whether this is something that you genuinely like doing or you're doing it for other people. And I think a lot of people have many things they do in their life and they say it's for them. But I feel like if you keep digging, you'll start to realize that like 99% of the things you're doing are for other people. And I think it goes back to just the way we're wired, the addiction we have to what other people think about us because it helps us to feel secure and that we have a tribe. I guess it's okay that when you start to dig deeper that you do a lot of things for other people. I guess it's just a part of human nature. But I think living by certain quotes and just being aware of it helps it a lot, right? Knowing in the back of your mind that you're doing things for others and helping, it helps you to eliminate parts of it, right? And you start to lean into the authentic side of yourself and be like, what do I genuinely want? And I guess that it goes back to the piece about mental afflictions, right? That before ignorance was bliss, right? You just kind of did things and you said it's for yourself, but now you kind of know that everything you're doing is for other people. And it could be challenging in a way because it feels kind of discomfort. But I guess now that you know it, you can control the times where you tend to do things for others. And I think that when you talk to people like that, you realize that so much of what they do is for others. And an example I was talking on the last week with Ryan Liu was that I went on a routine for the last 6 months where I slept at 9 o'clock and I woke up at six, right? And I think the reason I did that is because I decided that working in the morning was when I was most optimal, everything was optimized. And I guess I try to make work as efficient as possible, as you mentioned before, and it got me down from working 5 hours a day to like an hour a day, right? Which we talked about. I think you saw that video that I had made on the channel, and it was good for a while. I enjoyed it, but there was a time about a month ago where I was kind of getting sick of it, right? I'm like, okay, I've been doing this every day for a month. I've enjoyed it for a period of time, but now it's like I feel better when I sleep in a little bit more. And on usually I woke up at the same time on Sundays as well, right? But I started sleeping on Sundays, and I noticed that I feel better when I get an extra hour of sleep. So at first, it was a challenge to change it because I felt as if I had everything optimized and I had to work in that way, and there's no other way I can work. If I work after lunch, I'm too bloated. If I work after practice, I'm too tired. And I realized that all those were superstitions in my mind, right? That it was simply that I told myself that I had to do it this way, but it wasn't actually true. When I tried to, and over time, I realized that most of the discipline was actually superstition, which is one piece of it. But another piece that was challenging that I didn't admit at first, but what I started to realize over time was that it felt cool to wake up at six, right? I don't think I told many people, but occasionally when I'm sitting with a friend and he finds out, oh, wait, you wake up at 6 o'clock every day, you wake up at 5:30 every day, like there's a sense of that it makes you feel cool. And I think for a month, I didn't change my routine, wanting to change the routine, knowing that from like January 1st to February 1st, when I actually made the change, Sure, the second reason was there, but I think a big reason was just the fact that I was scared what other people would think about me, even though no one really knew about it in the first place. And I felt as if I was weak, or as if people would think I was weak if I sacrificed what was good for me and good for my health for others' perception, which connects back to, are you doing it for yourself and for others? Which I think I went off a little bit, maybe too far from the main core idea of being selfless. And I think doing things, being selfless without a reward. But I guess it's kind of connected in a way because it relates to the idea of how we tend to do things for others instead of ourselves. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. It's like dance like no one else is watching, right? You want to do things that you believe in, right? In an ideal world, you should only do things that you enjoy for your own self-interest and enjoyment, right? But then in some other scenarios, it's hard to do that, right? I like teaching, but can I teach without worrying about other people and how it affects others? Not really, because teaching fundamentally involves two people, right? Two parties. And it involves your experience. It's very important how what you go through, how you experience the class. So how would I grab myself and convince myself that I enjoy teaching and that I'm doing it for a selfless purpose, right? Sure, it's about all my students, it's about how I make them feel. But can I claim that I enjoy teaching for like my own benefits, right? Like how does that work? Is it because I enjoyed it sometimes the power trip, like I enjoy the power in the classroom? Is it because I enjoy grading? Probably not. Is it because, right? Like, why is it that we claim that we enjoy things that we do, especially when they're social things, right? It's a hard question, but I think, yes, definitely find your own convictions, what you believe in, what you think are important, and do those things that make you happy.
And I guess another question is, what does it really mean to do things for yourself? Like, what does it mean when I say that I enjoy this? Because, okay, maybe it's like the dopamine that's produced when you're actively like getting ready, and there's some excitement you feel when you're just doing the thing. But there's also a sense of enjoyment we get knowing that it's impacting others in some way, right? So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's always a bad thing to do things for others. And I think the example that I was talking about with Ryan last weekend was that he started going to the gym because of other people, right? He was tired of feeling skinny and feeling like weak. And sure, that's for other people, but I guess it's kind of positive peer pressure because it in turn improved his life, right? And sometimes when we think about other people, it helps us to be better, right? That's why family is such a grounding thing. That when you have a family that loves you and supports you, you're more likely to be more disciplined and be more of a better person around them because you're worried about how your actions affect them. So I don't think we should necessarily take this as a human flaw and think that we'll never be perfect, but you can actually use it to your advantage and say that it's not the end of the world if we do things for others and we use others to be good. Obviously, it's ideal if we can find a way to be good despite the fact that no one's watching. But even if it's like I'm picking up the trash when like no one else is there, is that still for me? Or do I secretly hope that someone's in the background watching me do this right now? And it raises the question, is there such a thing as like me and my enjoyment, or is it always through other people?
That is a deep question, right? There's a lot of like work being done right now in philosophy, in biology even, the ideas of like communal existence, right? Like my existence doesn't really mean much without a bigger context of the world, right? Like if if it's an empty universe with just myself, what does that look like? What does that mean, right? Like can I do anything? Can I be happy? What is right? There is no social constructs. There is no values. There is nothing, right? Like what would I do if it's just a universe with myself, right? Or like in philosophy, we talked about if there's a universe with just an apple in it, is the apple red? Like, what does red even mean, right? Because no one is there to define what red is. No one is there to watch the apple, right? Or like if a tree falls in the forest, no one's around. Does it make a noise? That's the thing that everybody's heard, right? Like, what does it mean when you are alone? Like, how do you make decisions and do things for yourself versus others? What does it mean to be the self, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important question. The self changes over time, right? Like Ryan enjoys going to the gym now, but maybe in 3 years it'll be like, oh, I deadlifted too much and too fast. Now my lower back hurts, and that's gonna hurt for the next 50 years, Right? Like that might happen. I have friends who got in the gym and then they like injured themselves from improper training and forms. And now they can't do that anymore. Literally, they're not allowed to go back and deadlift anymore. That's hard, right? Like suddenly the concept of self changes, or relatives who one day got diagnosed with cancer, their entire world changes, right? The first day they're like doing a set of things, and the next day it's like, well, no, I have to eat different. I have to like stop drinking, and I have to spend less time. I have to spend more time with my family because my time here is limited. That self changes. And I think it's important to reflect on that and right, like not go with the flow per se, but every day be grounded and think about what is something you want to achieve today and do those things because tomorrow that might be different. Like today, my goal really is to do a great job on the podcast, but tomorrow I won't have this podcast anymore. So my goal is gonna be different. So find those things every day and stick to those things and not worry about like long-term things. But I mean, think about your long-term goals, but ground yourself and not worry too much about what happens to others or outside of the self in the present moment.
Mr. Dom, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
All right, well, I'll see you tomorrow for our multivariable test. If you enjoyed that episode and you're going to enjoy this episode right here, make sure you hit that link right now and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.